the city because you don't have to learn foreign languages. You can travel everywhere.
Just being a lazy person, it gives me an advantage.
I think you can afford to be lazy now because you can survive at every corner of the world. But as a teacher, maybe you can just see that there are so many changes to the language because it belongs to the people from all the world. What do you think about this fact as a teacher? English language teacher.
It's a really difficult question. I think in lots of ways it doesn't really affect the teaching that much, but I think what it does affect is my own feelings about acceptability and difference. And I think it makes you, I mean, for me it's a natural feeling anyway because I grew up in London and I'm used to being around English being used as a lingua franca among all kinds of different people who also speak other languages. And I think it makes you, that experience of growing up in that situation makes you accepting of difference, and you're aware of difference, and you're aware of the fact that different people say things in different ways and have certain different expressions. And so I think this is slowly starting to come into English language teaching. I mean, it's funny for me coming to Russia because there's quite a strong feeling among lots of teachers in Russia of, yes, but what's the correct English? And it's like, maybe you just have to relax a bit more about that and accept a bit more difference, and maybe there is no one correct English. Obviously, some forms of English still have more prestige and more power, okay? And I think, you know, middle class, educated, standard, relatively received pronunciation, Southern English, still has a kind of socio-economic prestige. And so lots of people want to kind of speak that sort of English because it's prestigious. At the same time, I think people are just much more accepting of diversity these days, and more accepting of where you're from, you've got that accent, oh, you're Russian, fine, whatever.
You mean people, English people?
Yeah, and I think increasingly foreign people as well, because your experience of using English is with a wide range of people. In terms of actually teaching, I don't think it makes much difference in terms of the input, because the input that you're teaching isn't London English or Jamaican English or Nigerian English or whatever. It's just what's common among all of us. I was just talking about this. You know, it's teaching the 96% that we all have in common. The 4%'s interesting, and you know, it's fascinating to learn. Oh, what do you guys say there? Oh, we don't say it like that. We say it like this. That's interesting, but that's not what should be going on in the general English classroom, where you should be teaching common core language, I think. So, you know, if it means more acceptance of diversity of accents and ways of expressing, I think it's good. But I don't think it has a huge impact on the actual classroom content.
And now I'd like to ask about maybe English culture, and can you say what is it for you, just in some words, because maybe it's a kind of what are stereotypes to have about English culture as an Englishman?
English culture is a war zone. It's a very difficult thing because, like most countries, we're in the middle of a severe culture war, and I think there are very competing visions of what England is that have reached a kind of crisis point within the country.
Next year maybe it's Christmas or football for you. Just something
So,
like that. What is English culture for you?
For me
How do you see
personally,
that?
it's a very difficult question because I grew up in London. So for me, my own culture is, as a Londoner, I'm very international. I grew up listening to Jamaican music and Brazilian music and eating Indian food and hanging out with kids from all kinds of different backgrounds, watching footballers from different countries play in North London, going to nightclubs where people from all over the world would be in there. And so I guess for me, I feel like it's to do with being an open international person. I've still got, you know, obvious English roots, so it means an awareness of my own history, my own family history, the history of the country that's led to where we're at the moment. I think that's important to know about. But that's just my opinion. I mean, in a way, part of the problem with England at the moment is because people have such strong different feelings about what English culture is, there's this constant argument going on about it.
Because for
But
us
yeah,
it's
the
Queen,
Beatles things.
well, maybe some music. or something like this.
Yeah, you're talking to a rabid anti-royalist here. So, you know, I personally, I'm a Republican. I'd like to see a country without a royal family. I don't really see how we can be a proper democracy if we have an inherited aristocracy. So, I mean, even things like that, of course, you know, everyone has an opinion about the Queen, so the Queen is part of English culture. But there's certainly not one opinion. You know, there's a whole range of competing, arguing opinions about those things. For me personally, yeah, it's growing up with music, it's growing up with football and cinema and fashion and all of those things. But I guess what makes it specifically English or London is the mix of things that go into influencing that, you know, because kids in Moscow or Kaliningrad grew up with music and football and fashion and movies as well. But I grew up with a very particular mix of those things that shapes you in maybe a different kind of way, yeah?
You say you're a Londoner and do travel around England
Yeah.
or UK?
Yeah, both. Yeah. Londoner, English, British, citizen of the world.
Hugh, as just working in the...
That's really weird.
Hello! Yes, so working in the bookshop, I can say that the most often bought book here is Harry Potter. Sorry.
Doesn't
But
surprise
I really
Not
want
teaching
to-
lexically.
No.
Oh.
Well, it's Harry Potter. What is the secret of this book, do you think?
It's a fantasy vision of a certain kind of English stereotype that people are attracted to.
English stereotype.
It is,
Right.
because it's basically set, it's a posh kid, it's a geeky little posh kid who goes to a kind of public school and learns how to control the universe. And for me, it's
The universe, really?
he learns how to control magic, basically, yeah? It's like it feeds into loads of foreign stereotypes of Englishness. So when you watch the movie, it's set in these beautiful halls in Cambridge, Oxford, somewhere, one of the Oxbridges. You know, it's kind of, it's tourist board England. It's those beautiful halls, it's the beautiful countryside, it's the eccentric kind of characters. And so I think it sells a kind of, it's like a fairy tale with an added upper middle class stereotype of England stuck on top of it. And I think this is part of the appeal. It's the same reason Hugh Grant sells. You know, he exports well because he's like the stereotype of a certain kind of English person. And foreign people consume that because they kind of go, oh, it's so English. And for us, it's like, well, it's so upper middle class English. Yeah, but it's a very particular vision of England that I think people are attracted to. And you know, it's not badly written. They're entertaining stories.
Because she's a teacher of the English.
She was originally, yeah. I suspect she's probably stopped doing that now because the money's better as the writer of Harry Potter. I'm still working on my own Harry Potter, of course.
Okay, so you have two children.
I do.
What books do they read?
Oh God, my daughter reads whatever you put in front of her. At the moment, she's going through a phase of, she reads lots of historical stuff. So she reads about like
How old is
ancient,
she?
9.
9.
So she reads about ancient Egypt and the Romans and the Victorians and this kind of thing. She reads lots of books about women's history. So she's read about the suffragettes and how women got the vote. She read a lot about Rosa Parks and the kind of civil rights struggle. She reads, the one thing she's been obsessed with recently is this book called Wonder. I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know, she read that. When she was growing up, when she was younger, she read Harry Potter. She eats books,
You mean
basically.
younger than 9?
Yeah. She's like a book monster. And my son reads books about dinosaurs. Basically, any book about dinosaurs, you know. It's funny because he's much more factually oriented. He likes books with facts in. You know, he'll read the whole of the Guinness Book of Records. And Daddy, did you know the world's biggest cake was 34 metres high? I didn't, mate. Thank you for telling me. You know, why do you remember this stuff? He's much more fact-oriented. You know, I'm kind of pushing him to read books a bit more.
Okay, thank you. And now back to your professional career, let's say. You've been working with Delta Publishing and with National Geographic Learning for many years. Do you have some other plans?
Yeah, we're doing 2, maybe 3 books in a new Pearson General English series, which will start to come out next year.
Pearson is really very big.
This was
big
mainly
company.
what attracted us to
Yeah.
them.
Are they based in the US?
No, they're based in the UK,
UK.
just outside London. Yeah, yeah. Slightly
What's
different.
special about
But
this?
what's special? That they pay us very well.
Because it's really the biggest maybe company.
I think that the frustration we've had is we've written outcomes and we're really, really proud of what we've done with outcomes, but National Geographic can't really compete on a global scale with someone like Pearson.
Yeah.
We have a lot more freedom with National Geographic, and I think we've produced a better book, but to get to a wider audience or a wider market at some point, you make some compromises with your principles and you see how it works with the big people. I do feel a bit like there was a comedian in England called Paul Daniels who was this horrible little ugly guy, and when he was about 60 he married this sort of supermodel called Debbie McGee, who was 23, and she was interviewed on television and he said, "So Debbie McGee, age 23, what is it that attracts you to multi-millionaire magician Paul Daniels?" And it was like, he's got a good sense of humour. Of course he has. I feel a bit like this when you ask me, you know. So, what was it that attracted you to multi-million-pound publishing company, Pearson? They've got principles.
Okay, so ladies, maybe you have some questions.
No, they're doing that in a minute. No questions. No, that's the next part of the afternoon.
Maybe some.
Hold those questions. What questions that aren't in the things you've written up? Have they got time for 2 questions that they haven't written upstairs? If you have a question that you haven't written on a piece of paper upstairs and you'd like to ask it now, please feel free. Scared them now.
I'm afraid. So, I don't know, some of them.
Go on, go on.
At the beginning of the interview, you said you were an international person.
Yeah.
Is there any scene that you picked up from Russian culture?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's things I've picked up or things that I've felt and seen and heard in Russian culture that I have an affinity with or I feel are quite similar to my own experience of things. I think when I first came to Russia, a lot of the Russians I met were like Russians my age, yeah? And I think that generation of Russians, like guys in their late 40s, 50s, in a way I feel a lot of kind of common ground with them, because I think they've often been through quite hard times, they've struggled for what they've got, they don't just work, but they also like to live. They generally have a kind of, you know, work hard, play hard kind of people, and quite a dark sense of humour. They like telling stories. The stories are often insane stories about things that I can't imagine anybody ever having done, and then you hear these stories and it's like, where did you do this? Oh, I was in Murmansk working on a submarine. It's like, okay, this makes sense. So I like all that side of things. I like the kind of, that there's a certain kind of, I don't know the word for it, you know that Danish word they were using, like hygge or whatever it is. I feel there's that kind of thing here in Russia. Because you know they're like sitting on the underground in Moscow in the winter, looking like the world has ended and that they're the last person left and they're really angry about it. And then you go around their house and start talking to them and have a drink and chat and some food, and people start to relax. And then you get that kind of hygge feeling. And I feel that really strongly with Russia, where as an English person, where lots of people think we're quite cold and reserved and distant and we don't think we are, coming to Russia and seeing people who initially I thought were quite, you know, when my Italians say the English are so cold and unfriendly, go to Russia. You see what I'm like? Look, we're like Mediterranean people. And actually I think it's very similar, that the people have this stereotype of what you're like as being cold, distant, unfriendly, and then when you get to know people it's like, you're one of us. And I feel that very strongly here. I think there's kind of cultural similarities. Being lower class English, I think we're more direct And I think Russians are generally quite direct. Russians don't mess around with small talk. Generally, Russians just do big talk. And I like that. I like that kind of directness and not doing that weird upper middle class thing of beating around the bush and spending 2 hours to say something. And then I guess on top of that, of course, you just get influenced by the journeys you make, the people you make, the things you see, and all of that kind of becomes part of who you are and what your own experiences are. So I guess my main experience of Russian sort of culture is just through the people and through the stories and through the journeys and the meals and all of those kind of things. On top of that, I did do a block on Russian literature when I was at university, so I kind of read all of that stuff quite early on and had no idea what it was about. You know, like the first time I read Master and Margarita when I'm 23, it's like, I don't really get why, what does it all mean? I don't understand. And when I've been coming to Russia more and you learn more about the history and the context, like, and so I start to kind of appreciate all of, you know, it's funny because being English, I think a lot of English art and creativity comes out of the class conflict in England, and I think a lot of Russian creativity and genius has come out of the kind of conflict within Russian society over the years, and there's been a way of kind of processing and expressing that. So again, I feel like there's a kind of, it's quite similar in that sort of way. So I guess I just felt a kind of commonality. It's really weird because, you know, I spent years living in Indonesia, which on one level is a very different country, and I feel really comfortable in both places. And it's sort of, I don't feel that comfortable in Switzerland or that comfortable in Austria, or, you know, for me I find them boring. Nothing really happens there. I get restless in Switzerland after 3 days. Coming to Russia, you know, the one thing you can say about Russia is it's never boring. And you know, this is its blessing and its curse. And I find that fascinating. And you know, I like the people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and some people have books, your books here.
Oh, let's do that very quickly.
Yes. Let's start.
And then let's go back.
Yeah. Can we have a pen?